Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bo, Hari Bo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, the second canto. This is the 7th chapter. Incarnations with specific functions. I'll get that right later. And we're going to look at two verses. One does not have a purport, and one does have a brief purport. There's a lot to read, and so I was going to repeat each verse one time and not ask you to repeat it. So please fix your attention as best as possible. Absolutely. This is Sanskrit. I shall read by myself. But also when we get to the English translations, we won't repeat them. We won't read them responsively. Is that okay? Because there's this time constraint, okay? So this is verse 28. Yadvai braje braja pashun vishito yapitan palang swajivayad anugraha drishti vrishya chachudhaye ti vishavirya viloda jivam uchchata yushyad uragam viharan pradinyam. Translation. Again, we won't be repeating, so please listen carefully. Then also, when the cowherd boys and their animals drank the poison water of the river Jamuna, and after the Lord in his childhood revived them by his merciful glance, just to purify the water of the river Jamuna, he jumped into it as if playing and chastised the venomous Kalia snake, which was lurking there, its tongue emitting waves of poison. Who can perform such Herculean tasks but the Supreme Lord? Unlimited meditation can be, placed on this pastime of Lord Krishna, of dancing with his lotus feet on the head of the Kaliya serpent. All right, now we will repeat responsively, please, and just a few will chant the Sanskrit, so I don't end late. Basically, I have a lot of material, and I don't want to keep you late. Okay. Tat karma divyam ivayan nishinikshayanam. Tat karma divyam ivayan davagnina shuchibane paridohyamane. Uneshti brajamato vasitanta kalang. Netre pidhapya sabalo nadhigamya viryaha. Tatkarma divyam ibayan shinikshayanam. Navagnina shuchibane paridohyamane. Uneshati vrajamato vasitanta kalang. Netre pidhapya sabalo nadhigamya viryaha. Please chant. Tatkarma divyam ibayan shinikshayanam. Davagnina shuchibane paridohyamane. Uneshati brajato vasitanta kalam. Netre pidapya sabalo nadigamya viryaha. Karma devyam ivayam nishinikshayanam. Davagnina shuchibane paridohyamane. Uneshuti brajamato vasitanta kalam. Netre pidhapya sabalo nadhigamya viryaha. Ladies, please. Tatkarma divyam ivayani shinikshayanam. Navagnina shuchivane paridohyamane. Uneshati brajamato vasitanta kalam. Netre pidhapya sabalo nadigamya viryaha. Tatkarma divyam ivayani shinikshayanam. Navagnina shuchibane paridohyamane. Uneshyati brajamato vasitanta kalam. Netre pidhapya sabalo nadigamya viryaha. Tat. Please read. That. Karma. Activity. Divyam. Superhuman. Iva. Like. Yat. Which. Nishi. At night. Nikshayanam. Sleeping carefreely. Dava Ugnina. By the glare of the forest fire. Shuchibane. In the dry forest. Paridohyamane. Being set ablaze. Unneshati. Would deliver. Brajam. All the inhabitants of Braja. Ataha. Hence. Vasita. Surely. Antakalam. Last moments of life. Netre. On the eyes. Vidhapya. Simply by closing. Sabalaha. Along with Baladev. Anadigamya. Unfathomable. Viryaha. Prowess. Translation, again, I'll just repeat this once, or I'll chant it once, so please listen attentively and we'll move right to the purport. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. On the very night of the day of the chastisement of the Kaliya snake, when the inhabitants of Brajbhumi were sleeping carefreely, there was a forest fire ablaze due to dry leaves, and it appeared that all the inhabitants were sure to meet their death. But the Lord, along with Balaram, saved them simply by closing his eyes. Such are the superhuman activities of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Although in this verse the Lord's activity has been described as superhuman, it should be noted that the Lord's activities are always superhuman, and that distinguishes him from the ordinary living being. Uprooting a gigantic banyan or arjun tree and extinguishing a blazing forest fire simply by closing one's eyes are certainly impossible by any kind of human endeavor. But not only are these activities amazing to hear, but in fact all other activities of the Lord, whatever he may do, are all superhuman, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 4:9. Whoever knows the superhuman activities of the Lord, due to their transcendental nature, becomes eligible to enter the kingdom of Krishna, and as such, after quitting this present material body, the knower of the transcendental activities of the Lord goes back home, back to Godhead. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Shamariti Namane Namaste Sarasate Devi Gauravali Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavali Paschanti Vishutarine. So this chapter, the scheduled incarnations with specific functions, consists of 53 verses. And out of those 53, 38 verses are devoted to briefly describing the following 23 incarnations of Lord Bor, Sujagyor Hari, Kapila, Dattatreya, the four Kumaras, Nara and Narayan Rishi, Dhruva Maharaj, Prithu Maharaj, Rishabhadev, Hayagriva, Lord Matsya, Lord Tortoise, Lord Nrsingadev, Lord Vamanadev, Hangsavatar, Manu, Dhanvantari, Parashuram, Lord Ramachandra, Krishna Balaram, Vyasadeva, Buddha, and Kalki. Now, each of these incarnations is covered in just one verse, with these exceptions. Vamanadev is allotted 2 verses. Lord Narasimhadev and Lord Ramachandra are each allotted 3 verses, but Krishna Balaram are allotted 9 verses. So, on the one hand, all the incarnations of the Lord are absolute, but on the other hand, there are qualitative differences. Some of the incarnations are Vishnu Tattva, meaning that they are of the Godhead, of the Supreme Source, and some are called Shaktavesh avatars, meaning that they are Jiva souls, but highly empowered by Lord Krishna to carry out specific functions to promote the spiritual evolution of the conditioned souls. Now, this is approximate because I'm unsure about them, some of them, but very approximately, of the 23 incarnations mentioned in this chapter, approximately 14, the vast majority, are Jiva Tattva, and the remaining 9, again, approximately, are Vishnu Tattva. So one thing that this points to is the immense potential power of the individual soul. As we know, the individual souls are tiny sparks of the supreme whole, but they manifest practically infinite power when commissioned by the Lord to carry out specific functions, which, by the way, is the title of this chapter. So the other kind of qualitative difference between the various incarnations is what we would call rasa, or spiritual taste. Srila Prabhupada puts it very bluntly. I mean, I was a little surprised. I was going to say shocked, but a little surprised when Prabhupada said that the pastimes of Lord Krishna are simply the most attractive of all the unlimited pastimes of the Lord. I mean, I was feeling that, but I didn't have the guts to say it, so Prabhupada said it for us. Krishna, as we know, possesses all 6 opulence: wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation in full, and he expresses those opulence most fully when he appears as Krishna. That doesn't mean that Lord Ramachandra, Lord Nrsingadev, Lord Tortoise, or Lord Bor are lesser incarnations or are in any way limited in their power or their opulence. Rather, it means that Krishna voluntarily, this is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, holds back the expression of some of his opulences, except when he appears as Krishna. And since Krishna's opulences are what attract us, when Krishna unleashes the full expression of such opulence is when he's the most attractive. So, if you find yourself being drawn to one or another of the incarnations of Krishna, consider yourself very fortunate. But if your attention is most captured by Krishna himself, don't worry, you're not offending the other forms of Godhead. There's sort of a reverse example of that with the famous Murari Gupta in Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. Murari Gupta was none other than Hanumanji himself, and as if to test him, again and again, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu urged him to fix his mind on the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. But Murari Gupta, being an eternal associate of Lord Ram, simply could not give up his allegiance to Lord Ram. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the overview, or give an overview of today's class. Again, I'm determined to end on time. It's rare on the Vaishnav calendar that 4 transcendental personalities are celebrated in a single day, but today is one such day. It was also, what is the name of the full moon today? Does anyone remember? The red moon? Okay. And also it was a full eclipse this morning around 4 o'clock in the morning or so. So it's a special day in many ways. So I'm going to transition to describing 3 of the personalities we're celebrating today, and hopefully leave a fuller explanation of the current chapter of the Bhagavatam to subsequent class givers. So the four personalities being celebrated today are Srila Parameswari Thakur. I haven't prepared anything on him, but today is his celebration of his disappearance. And then we're celebrating the appearance of Srila Madhavendra Puri, Srila Srinivas Acharya, and their Lordship Shri Radha Rahman of Vrindavan. So I'm going to look at the latter three personalities, that Srila Madhavendra Puri, Srinivas Acharya, and Shri Radha Rahman. There is a wealth of information about Madhavendra Puri, about Srinivas Acharya, and Shri Radha Rahman. So my main job today is that of a distillery. I'm going to condense the available information into three brief spoken essays. So let's begin. It's not exactly in chronological order, but two of them are. Let's begin with the appearance of Radha Rahman. And two of these essays take about 5 minutes, and the longest of them is about Srinivasa Acharya, and that takes a little over 15 minutes. If there's not time to do all three, I'll just speak two of them. So during his travels to South India in the year 1511, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to the ancient temple of Sri Ranganath, which is situated on an island in the middle of the river Kaveri in the state of Tamil Nadu. The temple of Sri Ranga Kshetra was extremely large. The temple hall resounded with the sounds of hundreds and thousands of Brahmins chanting Vedic hymns. In the midst of this scene, right out of Vaikuntha, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu entered, chanting the names of Krishna in a voice so sweet it defeated the voices of 10 million Gandharvas. Everyone in the temple became struck with wonder. What unprecedented beauty! Tears of ecstatic love poured from the Lord's lotus eyes. Every limb, every part of his body was filled with such exquisite grace that the Brahmins present began to wonder, is he a demigod? Can such symptoms and emotions be found in human beings? When the Lord came before the deity and fell down, just as a tree is blown down by the wind, he appeared to be a mountain of gold rolling on the ground. Now, a little backstory. Near the temple lived a very prominent Vaishnav family headed by Sri Venkata Bhatta. And if you're all familiar with the Chaitanya Charitamrita, his name should be familiar. Venkata Bhatta belonged to the Sri Ramanuja Sampradaya. And Venkata Bhatta's brother was the renowned Prabodhananda Saraswati. And Venkata's son, who was about 10 years old at the time, was named Gopal. When Venkata Bhatta saw Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the temple, his heart flooded with devotion, and he moved the crowds away to give the Lord some room. When the Lord regained his external consciousness, Venkata Bhatta approached him and took the dust of his lotus feet. Mahaprabhu gazed at him and, chanting Krishna, Krishna, embraced him firmly. Venkata invited Mahaprabhu to his home, and when they arrived, he bathed the Lord's lotus feet, and he and his family drank the sacred bathwater. When Venkata's young son Gopal came to offer his obeisances to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Lord picked him up and affectionately placed him on his lap. And while staying at their home, the Lord would call Gopal after he had finished his meals and offer his remnants to the boy. After remaining at Venkata Bhatta's home during Chaturmasya, that's the 4 months of the rainy season, of course, the Lord prepared to continue his tour of South India. Being pleased with Gopal's sincere service and devotion, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu initiated him and instructed him to serve his mother and father and always engage in chanting Krishna's glories, and later to go to Vrindavan. And again, these are all approximate, but Gopal would have been about 10 years old at the time, very young boy. So finally, at the age of 30, Gopal Bhatta came to Vrindavan, and this would have been around the year 1531. And remember, the Lord's manifest pastimes would continue only another 3 years, because he departed from this world in 1534. When Gopal Bhatta arrived in Vrindavan, Srila Rupa and Sanatan treated him with the same care and affection they would their own brother, and they became immediate lifelong companions. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ended his earthly pastimes some 3 years later, Gopal Bhatta felt intense separation. To relieve his devotees' anxiety, the Lord instructed Gopal Bhatta in a dream, if you want my darshan, then make a trip to Nepal. So Gopal Bhatta went to Nepal, and while he was there, he bathed in the famous Kali Gandaki river. He dipped his water pot in the river, and he was surprised to see several Shalagram Shilas enter his pot. So he carefully placed the Shilas back in the river. But they re-entered his pot when he refilled it with water. After emptying and refilling his pot a third time, Gopal Bhatta found 12 Shalagram Shilas sitting there. Thinking this must be the Lord's mercy, he kept all the Shilas and returned to Vrindavan. Wherever he would go, he would carry his 12 Shilas carefully wrapped in a cloth. One day, a wealthy man came to Vrindavan and offered Gopal Bhatta a variety of clothing and ornaments for his Shilas. Even though they couldn't be used to decorate his Shilas, Gopal Bhatta kept the clothes and ornaments. It was Nrsimha Chaturdasi, which we celebrated yesterday. And Gopal Bhatta, immersed in thoughts of Nrsimha Dev, prayed to his Shilas, "O my Lord, you are very merciful and always fulfill the desires of your devotees. I wish to serve you in your form with arms and legs and a blissful smiling face with lotus eyes. If I had such a deity, then I would be able to decorate him so nicely with all these clothes and ornaments." In the evening, after offering foodstuffs and arti to his Shalagram Shilas, Gopal Bhatta put them to rest, and very early in the morning he got up and took bath in the Jamuna. When he returned from his bath, he uncovered these Shalagrams in order to offer them puja, and saw amongst them a deity of Krishna playing his flute. There were now, instead of 12 Shilas, there were 11 Shilas and this deity. For one of the Shilas had manifested as the beautiful threefold bending form of Tri Bhangananda Krishna, Radha Rahman. Floating in an ocean of ecstasy, Gopal Bhatta fell to the ground and recited various prayers and hymns. When Rupa and Sanatana Goswami and other devotees received news of this miraculous event, they came running to see the Lord. Gazing on the Lord's transcendental form, they bathed him with their tears. This deity is called Radha Rahman. Although physically there is no apparent deity of Radha there, still there is a place setting for her, and she is worshipped in her unmanifested form along with Sri Raman. So even today, the Radha Rahman temple has the highest standard of deity worship in all of Vrindavan. And Prabhupada said that we should model our deity worship after the deity worship of Radha Rahman. Traditionally, on the anniversary of Sri Radha Rahman's appearance, which is today, 500 liters of milk and many other sweetmeats are offered for the Lord's pleasure. Now, unlike many other deities, Sri Radha Rahman have very, very intricate features, including fingernails and even teeth. And on the backside of his body, parts of the original Shalagram Shila from which the Lord manifested can be seen. The present-day guardians of the temple disclose that some scientists, skeptical of the Lord self-manifesting from his Shila form, had them come, the scientists come to examine the deity under the supervision of the devotees. After careful examination, the scientists could find absolutely no evidence of carving, a fairly clear sign of a self-manifested deity. That's Sri Radha Rahman. So as it happens, the preeminent disciple of Sri Gopal Bhatta Goswami was Srinivasacharya, so we'll hear about him next. This is a little longer, about 15 minutes, and this was excerpted from a chapter entitled The Embodiment of Lord Chaitanya's Love by Satyaraj Das, or Stephen Rosen, and this is taken from his book, The Lives of the Vaishnava Saints, which he published in 1991. I didn't know much about Srinivasacharya, but after spending several days, again, distilling this information, I practically fell in love with him. Just an amazing personality. So Srinivasacharya is one of the most important personalities in the religious history of Bengal, perhaps the most important Vaishnava teacher in the generation immediately following Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srinivasacharya is remembered as the illustrious disciple of Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Jiva Goswami, and his achievements include delivering the writings of the Goswamis from Vrindavan to Bengal and organizing the first Gaur Purnim festival. Srinivas was born on the full moon day of the month of Vaishakha April, May. Again, we're celebrating his appearance today, sometime between the years 1520 and 1525. I found it interesting that they knew the exact day that he appeared, but the year was not as important. Sometimes it's between 1515, 1530, so anyway, we get the idea. Srinivasa's maternal grandfather was a learned astrologer, and he told his parents that Srinivas was a Mahapurusha, a divinely empowered soul. Srinivas had a broad chest and a long, elegant nose, and his beautiful eyes extended like lotus petals. Like Lord Chaitanya, he had a bodily luster resembling molten gold and arms that extended down to his knees. When he was very young, his mother would constantly sing the glories of Lord Chaitanya into his ear. And as Srinivas grew, he learned to chant the names of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Radha Krishna. Soon he was known as the brightest and most beautiful boy in Chakhandi, Bengal, the village where he was born. Because of Srinivas's popularity, he was blessed to meet the incredible devotee Narahari Sarakar, an intimate associate of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Narahari instructed Srinivas later on to go to Puri to see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, meanwhile, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was preparing his associates for Srinivas's arrival. The Lord had already written to Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Gopal Bhatta Goswamis in Vrindavan, requesting them to instruct Srinivas on spiritual life. And the Lord asked Gadadhar Pandit in Jagannath Puri to teach Srinivas the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's an unparalleled array of spiritual teachers. When Srinivas was still a boy, he set out along with a companion for Jagannath Puri. But on the way, he learned that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had left this world. Then, Lord Chaitanya, along with Nithyananda Prabhu, who had also passed away, appeared to Srinivas in a dream and consoled him. But Srinivas was still grief-stricken. Arriving in Puri, he went to the Gopinath temple to take shelter of Gadadhar Pandit. And remember, he was going to learn Bhagavatam from Gadadhar Pandit. Gadadhar Pandit was overcome with separation from Lord Chaitanya, and tears constantly flowed from his eyes. Srinivas bowed at Sri Gadadhar's feet and introduced himself. Gadadhar Pandit became joyful. "I'm glad you have come," he said. "Just before passing away, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told me to teach you the Bhagavatam. He knew you would arrive in Puri one day, and he asked me to explain Krishna Leela to you." But Gadadhar's joy again turned to sadness. "Alas," he said, "I cannot teach you Bhagavatam at this time, O young Srinivas, for the manuscript in my possession has become illegible from the tears I have cried onto its pages." But to remedy that, Sri Gadadhar sent a message to Narahari Sarakar in Bengal, asking him to secure another manuscript of the Bhagavatam. Remember, this was for the industrial age and mass printing. Narahari replied that another copy was available and that a messenger should be dispatched from Puri immediately. Gadadhar sent Srinivas himself and told him to hurry. The separation from Lord Chaitanya was intolerable, Gadadhar said, and he didn't know how long he could stay in this world. Before leaving Puri, Srinivas visited many of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's most intimate associates, and his bodily features reminded them of Lord Chaitanya. Think Ramananda Roy, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and so forth. Seeing his intense and unprecedented love of Godhead, they could understand that he was Gaura Shakti, the embodiment of the energy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Srinivas arrived in Bengal and received the copy of the Bhagavatam from Narahari Sarakar, he learned that Gadadhar Pandit had passed away, which was a terrible blow. Then Gadadhar Pandit appeared to him in a dream and encouraged him to still go forward. So do you see a pattern emerging here? Then Srinivas visited the house of Nithyananda Prabhu. Remember, Lord Nithyananda had already passed away. However, Sri Nithyananda's widow, Janavi Devi, encouraged him to start for Vrindavan without delay, because Rupa and Sanatan would soon rejoin the Lord in the spiritual world. And so, without further delay, Srinivas set out for Braj. By this time, he was a young adult. Meanwhile, Sanatana Goswami had left this mortal world, and Rupa Goswami could not bear the separation. Sri Rupa felt that he too might not survive to instruct Srinivas, so he asked his distinguished disciple and nephew, Jiva Goswami, to care for Srinivas. Traveling in those days, mainly by foot, was very difficult. However, Srinivas was making progress. But just 4 days before arriving in Vrindavan, he heard that Sanatan had passed away. And when he reached Mathura, he learned that Rupa Goswami had passed away only 3 days earlier. Srinivas fell to the ground crying like a madman. He felt himself the most unfortunate person in the universe. He had failed to meet Lord Caitanya and to study the Bhagavatam with Gadadhar Pandit, and now he failed to meet Rupa and Sanatan. While Srinivas sat beneath a tree wishing for his own death, Rupa and Sanatan appeared to him, guess how, in a dream, and told him he was the embodiment of Lord Chaitanya's love. They encouraged him to proceed to Vrindavan to take shelter of Gopal Bhatta Goswami and to study under Sri Jiva with all his life and soul. The words of Sri Sanatan and Rupa somewhat relieved Srinivas's heavy heart. He could travel again, and he soon felt the dust of Vrindavan beneath his feet. He approached Rupa Goswami's Radha Govinda temple, hoping to find more solace at Lord Govinda's lotus feet. As Srinivas sat before the deity, Jiva Goswami and his many followers entered the temple. Srinivas introduced himself, and Sri Jiva greeted him with loving hospitality. Then Jiva introduced Srinivas to Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who took Srinivas to his Radha Rahman temple and asked the deity there to bless him. Gopal Bhatta Goswami initiated Srinivas and began to instruct him. And since Jiva Goswami was the preeminent Vaishnava philosopher of the period, Gopal Bhatta sent Srinivas to him for further instruction. Now we're going to introduce 2 more personalities, and they sort of become like a trio. So another young scholar, the illustrious Narottam, had been studying under Jiva for a year. Then a young Vaishnava named Dukhi Krishna Das arrived in Vrindavan. So the 3 young devotees, Srinivas, Narottam, and Dukhi Krishna Das, studied under Jiva Goswami with utmost enthusiasm, and they became his best students, and they also became inseparable friends. Jiva Goswami ordered them to study the forests of Vrindavan with the guidance of Raghava Pandit, who knew all the sacred groves and their significance. Eventually, Srinivas, Narottam Das, and Dukhi Krishna Das were given a special mission. They were to distribute the teachings of the Goswamis in Bengal and other areas. Vaishnavism was widely embraced in Bengal, but literature explaining the Vaishnava philosophy was wanting. This demonstrates the importance of not only practicing, but understanding the philosophy that underlies the practice. So Jiva Goswami called for a large assembly of Vaishnavas, and he called Narottam Das. He said, "From this day forward, you will be known as Narottam Thakur Maharshai." And then he beckoned for Srinivas to approach. He said, "You will be known as Srinivas Acharya." And finally, Dukhi Krishna Das, he said, "Because you have brought so much pleasure, Ananda, to Radharani, Syama, you will now be called Shyamananda." Then Jiva Goswami told them of their mission to Bengal, Odisha, formerly Orissa, and other provinces of India. So this is another major Maha launching of the Sankirtan movement. Sri Jiva began the preparations for his students' long and arduous journey. These devotees were his best students, and he would spare no pains for their welfare. Remember, traveling then was not like it is now. Jiva Goswami had a rich merchant disciple from Mathura supply a large cart, 4 strong bullocks, and 10 armed guards. The manuscripts, original works by Rupa, Sanatan, Gopal Bhatta, Raghunath Das, Jiva, and others, were placed in a large wooden chest which was bolted and covered with a waxed cloth. The party began their journey from Braj, and after many months of travel reached a small village named Gopalapur in Bengal. When they retired that night, they felt confident that their journey was almost complete. The local king, however, employed a large number of thugs and assassins who infested the highways and robbed or killed travelers. The king's astrologers were ever ready to submit to him confidential reports as to what riches awaited him if he carried out robberies in particular localities. The king's dacoits had been following the sacred bullock cart from afar. This cart was especially interesting because the king's astrologers had said that it held a great treasure. The dacoits saw only 15 men escorting the cart, 10 armed soldiers, 2 cartmen, and 3 holy men. The band of dacoits, however, numbered over 200, and they had inflamed each other's imaginations with the astrologer's words, quote, "This cart is filled with jewels more valuable than gold." Srinivas and the traveling party spent the night near a beautiful lake. All 15 men in his party slept soundly, tired from their journey. But when they awoke, their worst nightmare had come to pass. The manuscripts had been stolen. They could not contain their tears. Srinivas, the leader of the party, advised Narottam and Shamananda to proceed to Bengal and Odisha to spread the Vaishnava teachings as they had learned them. He would take it upon himself to retrieve the manuscripts. He wrote to Jiva Goswami and told him all that had happened. Meanwhile, as the king was rummaging through treasures stolen from various travelers, his servants appeared with the court's most recent acquisition, Srinivas's carefully wrapped chest of, quote, the most precious jewels. The king dropped everything else and feverishly unwrapped his latest prize. Having heard the prophecies, he could scarcely imagine what splendors awaited him. In one suspenseful moment, he removed the covering cloth and opened the trunk to reveal manuscripts. Where was the priceless treasure? Lifting out the top manuscript in disbelief, the Lord saw the signature, Sri Rupa Goswami, written on a palm leaf. When he examined further and began reading Sri Rupa's beautiful exposition of Vaishnava philosophy, he felt something change deep within his heart. He reverentially returned the book to the trunk and retired for the night, aware for the first time of the grave sin he had instigated. That night the king had an unusual dream. He saw a beautiful and effulgent person whose body was filled with divine energy. "Do not worry," the person said with a loving smile. "Soon I will come to your kingdom and we will meet. I will retrieve my manuscripts and you will be relieved of all sinful reactions. Your joy will be boundless. Know for certain that you are my eternal servant and I am your eternal well-wisher." The next morning the king awoke, eagerly awaiting the day when the mysterious prediction of his dream would come to pass. Meanwhile, Srinivasacharya made his way to the outskirts of the town, where he met a Brahmin resident named Krishnavallabha. The two became friends, and Krishnavallabha invited Srinivas to be a guest in his home. Krishnavallabha mentioned that the king regularly convened a Bhagavatam study group, so Srinivas asked him to take him there. When they arrived at the court pundit was reciting and commenting upon the Bhagavatam. Srinivas was unimpressed but said nothing. After 2 weeks hearing the court pundit, Srinivas could not contain himself, and after the meeting he spoke to the pundit. "You, sir, do not follow the text," said Srinivas, "nor are your commentaries in line with Sridhar Swami or the other standard exponents of Bhagavad philosophy." The court pundit listened to Srinivas's comments but ignored his advice. The king, however, who was nearby, overheard what was said and found it interesting. The next day, at the Bhagavatam recital, the court pundit again attempted to elucidate the esoteric section of the Bhagavatam that delineates Sri Krishna's Rasalila. Respectful but firm, Srinivas interrupted with a question. "Sir, how can you comment on such confidential subjects without referring to the statements of Sridhar Swami? You are obviously unfamiliar with his work." The Pandit this time became angry. He disliked being challenged in front of his assembly. Before another word was said, the king began to defend Srinivas's position. "How is it that this Brahmin scholar finds fault with your explanations?" he asked. "Perhaps your interpretations are questionable," the king said. The Pandit replied, "Who can interpret the text better than I? This newcomer is an upstart, and he dares to question me in the presence of your majesty." Then he turned to Srinivas. "If you are such an authority on the Bhagavatam, why don't you explain these verses in a better way?" Srinivas rose to the challenge. He sang the Bhagavatam verses beautifully and then commented upon them with great verve and authority. He drew upon existing Vaishnava explanations and yet offered his own unique presentation. No one had ever heard such a masterly enunciation of Bhagavad philosophy. The king encouraged him to go on, allowing him to speak for several hours. When he finished, the whole assembly applauded, ecstatic with Srinivas's contagious love for Krishna. The court pundit could not believe his ears. He was defeated, but he was happy. The king was greatly moved. "No one has ever come to this kingdom and shared so much love and scholarship in the way you have," he said to Srinivas. "Please tell me your name and where you come from." "My name is Srinivas, and I'm a native of this country." Remember, he was born in Bengal. "I came here to see your magnificent court and to relish the Bhagavatam." The king then gave him the best accommodations in the palace and asked him to stay as long as he liked. About another 2 minutes. Please bear with me. Later that evening, the king asked Srinivas to dine with him, but Srinivas said that he took only one simple meal per day and had already eaten. Nonetheless, the king encouraged him to have some fruit, and Srinivas complied, not wanting to offend his distinguished host. As Srinivas ate his fruit, the king sat at his side like a humble servant. The king had never felt this way about anyone. He then realized that Srinivas was the effulgent person who he had seen in his dream, his guru, and he wanted to render some menial service. The following day in the great assembly, Srinivas again spoke from the Bhagavatam. Once again, the eager, expectant audience relished every word. Srinivas astonished all who listened. He spoke with erudition, sensitivity, and devotion, honoring his Vaishnava predecessors, and everyone present agreed that the wisdom of the orator far exceeded his years. One by one, people came and bowed at Srinivas's feet, hoping to become his disciple. Later, the king submitted himself to Srinivas as a lowly beggar. "You are the real king," he said, "for you have love for Krishna. I am not even worthy to be in your presence." Srinivas, with all humility, merely shook his head. He was not able to accept his own exalted position. The king persisted. "Allow me to be your servant. Please, how can I serve you? My entire kingdom is at your disposal." Srinivas replied, "I came from the holy city of Vrindavan with a mission from Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Jiva Goswami. I was to bring their writings to Bengal, but unfortunately this treasure was robbed within your kingdom. If I cannot retrieve these books, I would prefer to lose my life. Can you help me get them back?" The king burst into tears. "A poor worm am I," he said, "lost hopelessly in this land of birth and death. My own men pillaged for years and years under my order, and then they came upon your party. We were told you carried the greatest treasure in the universe, and we naturally pursued it. I cannot begin to express my sorrow." Reflecting for a moment, the king said, "But there is a positive side to all of this. Our meeting would not have occurred otherwise. I would commit these sins again and again for but a moment of your association." Srinivas laughed and reassured the king that sinful life was unnecessary for attaining his association. Srinivas then forgave the king for all his sins and asked him to sin no more. So we'll end. Srinivas Acharya ki jai, Shri Radha Rahman ki jai, Srila Madhavendra Puri ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Primananda Hari Hari Bol. Thank you for your attention.